First, I want to welcome you to Boulder, to our campus, to CU Boulder. My name is Doug Smith. I'm Assistant Dean for the College of Engineering and Applied Science and co-founder with a couple of my partners of Catalyze CU Boulder, which is our cross-campus accelerator. So I want to just a couple of shout-outs to Ashley Tillman, who's been a great partner with me and organizer from the Deming Center at the School of Business, and Becky Mark, who's Assistant Director of the Idea Forge, which is where we'll be tomorrow. The Idea Forge is a great maker space that is what used to be the Fleming Law Center. They abandoned it, built a new building, and you know what's not good enough for the lawyers is certainly good enough for the engineers and entrepreneurs. We'll take it. We rebuilt it into a great maker space, and it's just really a special place you'll get to see tomorrow. Fletcher Richmond, is Fletcher in here? Is he still outside? I'm sure he's working. Okay. So Fletcher's another one of our partners who helped us co-found our accelerator, Catalyze CU Boulder, and has been part of this organizing this event this fall as well. So this event really was born out of the work we did last spring, getting on the phone and speaking to lots and lots of universities across the country, trying to find out what does an accelerator on a university look like? What does it have? What are your issues? How can we learn from you? And many of you talked to us, Connie and Kyle and others talked to us and said, well, it's this or that or the other thing. And it was really a rich experience. And coming out of that, it helped us shape what we did in our accelerator last summer, which we were rookies all the way and made a lot of missteps, but we're learning. And we, in spite of that, had some really terrific teams come out of it that you'll get to meet tomorrow. But coming out of it, we also realized that we don't really have a network for our accelerators at a university. We're going to hear from our Global Accelerator Network folks tomorrow who do that on the for-profit side of things and doing a great job linking them. But for us at the university, we don't really have it. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to get together, to exchange our views, to see if we can begin a conversation, tell some stories, and see if we can learn from each other. I had lunch together with Chris Markle, and it was fun for us today just to go back and forth and realize how many things are different for us and what we can look at. So that's really why we're all together. That's our hope, is that we can begin a conversation and perhaps a network that would go on and let us continue to communicate in terms of our accelerator experience and where we go and what our missions are and how we do it. So that's what it's about, and thank you so much for coming out. So tonight, to kick things off, I've asked Brad Feld to join us, and Brad's been a great supporter of our campus and our college and our entrepreneurial experiences here on campus. About a year ago, in fact, Brad, it was March 11th last year, I called up. I didn't really know Brad Feld, didn't know who he was, and that tells you where I was. And he and Dave Cohen met with me and were very patient to explain to me what accelerators were like, how they were different at the university, and some of the issues with that. One of the first things Brad said was, "Have you read my book?" No,
shamelessly, I would say. Saves me a lot of time.
Well, and so he immediately, when I said no, he immediately went and got it. Startup Communities, we have a bunch of copies out on the front. You go in there. It was immensely helpful. It gave me language, gave me context, and it put it right in Boulder, so it enabled me to see it within our own context, and it was really helpful for me. So it was great fun to read, and I found myself at a lot of coffee shops with my highlighter working through it and understanding it all, and continue to refer back to it quite often. So tonight, we're just going to have a bit of a dialogue. Brad's had a long experience with our college, with our campus here at the university, and with our chancellor and others, and has some interesting views on it, and I want Brad to share those with you. So we're going to do that, have a bit of question and answer. Then we'll open it up to you for questions, and certainly don't hesitate to ask any. And Brad's pretty skilled at taking the ones that come from left field and turning them into something really meaningful. So with that, I think we'll get started. So Brad, background, MIT, computer science or management science, what was it?
Actually management. When I went to MIT, I was a freshman in 1983. And for those of you that are old enough to remember 1983, it was when the personal computer was starting to really take off.
Wow.
And I think something like 95% of my freshman class wanted to do computer science.
Wow,
And at MIT, it's called Core 6.
right.
So it's both computer science, used to be computer science and electrical engineering, and I had absolutely no interest in electrical engineering. And so my freshman year, they had 4 other departments ended up doing basically concentrations in computer science. There were civil engineering, math, physics, and management. And I was interested in business, but I didn't really understand why.
Yeah,
And it turned out because I was very interested in entrepreneurship, but they didn't have that word then,
Right.
sort of the language around it. So I ended up doing computer science concentration, and I did, my first company was a software company, so I was already a
yeah,
programmer.
yeah,
But then I also had a traditional undergraduate and then master's business education, or at sort of whatever, to the extent that MIT is traditional in anything they do. And that was very helpful, I think, in giving me a broader perspective versus just being in computer science.
right. But that still enabled you to start up your own company or work at a company and then sell it? How was that in the late 80s?
Yeah, I started my first company while I was in school. It was started with a partner, a guy named Dave Jilk, who lives here in Boulder now and has started a couple of companies. We've done a few things together.
Mm-hmm.
He's also done a spin-off, CU spin-off, the TLO spin-off from Randy Riley's lab.
Yeah,
In I'd say roughly computer vision is broader than that. It's
Yeah.
more, more
Techno.
interesting than that.
Mhm.
It's a company called eCortex, which is one that he still is involved in. And we self-funded the business, so we started it with $10. $1, each share of stock was $1.
I have some of that stock.
I got
Not theirs.
Yeah, I got 6 shares. He got 3 shares, and my dad got 1 share. My dad was our advisor and one of early mentor. And we essentially built a company that had to be cash flow positive because we had no money.
Had no money.
And 7 years later, we'd grown it to about a $2 million a year business, about 20 people. As a software consulting company back before PC-based software really existed.
Right.
So in the late 80s, early 90s, this was well before web and internet stuff. It was really before PC databases and networks. I mean, they were just starting to emerge, but they just sucked. It was
Yeah.
really miserable.
Yeah.
And we built this company that was basically a bunch of computer science people solving and writing software for business people, and then implementing these fairly difficult to implement PC-based networks, in these medium-sized, small, medium-sized businesses.
Right, right.
And our motto eventually became, probably about 1990, we realized that as we were starting to grow, our job was simple. We just needed to suck less than the previous people. Because it was
That's your business plan.
kind of business where, most of our clients had already spent a bunch of money with another consultant or trying to do it themselves, or they built something that didn't really work very well. And for us to be successful, all we really needed to do was suck less. And we said it tongue-in-cheek, but it was actually quite useful because a lot of times we'd be in these situations where somebody had spent $100,000 on a $10,000 project that didn't work.
Yeah.
And you had to, we had to explain, look, we can get something good working for you, but the $100,000 that you spent is not my problem.
Right.
Like, I can't help
It's gone.
you.
Yeah.
If you don't have the resources to do it, we can't be successful in any scenario.
Yeah.
And the "we suck less" motto actually really brought that to the surface because it broke the ice and there was early
Right.
conversations that you could have with Franklin. And then that business, which was based in Boston, was acquired in 1993 by a public company that ended up being called Ameridata Technologies.
Oh.
Ameridata got bought by GE Capital in 1996 for about $500 million. So I had the experience of going from CEO, I was president because we didn't know what a CEO was, so I was president and Dave was vice president, of a visible, we were pretty visible in Boston because
Right.
of what we did and we were well regarded, but small,
Mm-hmm.
to being the 8th of 40 companies Ameridata bought over a 3-year period. My group grew from 20 to 50 people in about 9 months because I picked up a couple of other things that Ameridata had and
Sure.
incorporated them into my group. And then we bought a 200-person software consulting firm, and I very gladly handed the keys to the CEO of that company, a guy named David Mitchell, and so merged my 50 people into his 200, and I became CTO. So I spent about the next 9 to 12 months doing a couple of things, but I went from never working for a big company to now reporting to the two co-chairmen in a staff job where my job was to do two things. One was essentially just create havoc amongst all of the companies they were acquiring, because everybody thought they were geniuses about software, but in fact really they were just people that sold computers.
Right.
And so there was a lot of good stuff in there, but it was you had to sort of level all those conversations, but also get people to think about what was going on in the future. So a lot of, at the time, Novell NetWare was the dominant networking thing. Microsoft had come out with this thing called Windows NT that was just starting.
Right.
And it was pretty obvious to anybody that was sort of detached from it and looking at it that this Microsoft thing was going to run over Novell, which was my belief.
Yeah.
But people who had been making their business selling Novell Network kind of couldn't see it. So I spent a lot of time that. The other thing I did was I was involved in a bunch of acquisitions. I didn't know anything about doing deals, making investments before my company got acquired. While I was working for them, I made a bunch of angel investments. The commercial internet was just starting, so I wrote a lot of $25,000 and $50,000 checks as an angel investor between 1994 and 96. But I also was the technical guy on the deal team. So when they were buying a company, I wasn't part of the negotiation on the front end, although I got exposed to some of it because I was these two co-chairmen that were the leaders of the business were great mentors and close friends, Len Fassler and Jerry Pock. So they exposed me to a lot of stuff so I could learn. But my job was basically, as the deal was coming together, every company they bought, again, mostly hardware resale companies, back when you could sell a PC and make 30% margin on it. All of those companies had a co-founder who was a software guy.
Right.
And all the software guys thought that each of these companies had a story about how they should be worth so much more than the multiple of EBITDA that was the formula that Ameridata was paying,
Right.
because they had this software that was so valuable. And my job was to go spend a day or two with them, and when I left, the software guy would say back to his partners, "We can't smoke them on this." they know what we got.
But we really have.
And I became friends with a bunch of these entrepreneurs who were, my strategy, my approach for it was I didn't go and stay in a hotel and have these meetings. I just went and stayed at the software guy's house. And so, they'd have me, and they almost always did.
Yeah.
We'd hang out, and we'd stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning talking about their dreams and their visions. And many of these entrepreneurs then got even more excited about being part of Ameridata because they had somebody, they'd run into these guys
Yeah.
in suits and ties that didn't feel like them, but now all of a sudden there's this guy that has
Here's a
long
guy.
hair and sort of feels like.
Code tech guy.
So that was my first wave of my business experience.
Wow. So then Amy says, we've had enough time in Boston. We need to go west, young man. And Boulder, here we came, 1995.
Yeah, our move here was pretty random. So I was when I sold Feld Technologies, I was 28. My wife Amy's from Alaska, and I grew up in Dallas, Texas. We were both in Boston. She went to Wellesley College. And Boston was good for us, but it wasn't home.
Right.
It just didn't ever feel like home to either of us. Although we think that people this year are being really wimpy in Boston because we had lots of years like that where there was just shitloads of snow. So when I heard that you have somebody from MIT coming, when he comes, you can just say, yeah, Scott Feld said you're being kind of wimpy. And about 2 months before I turned 30, Amy told me she was moving to Boulder and I could come with her if I wanted to. We were married at the time. And we had been to Colorado, and I'd come here a lot as a kid from Dallas skiing, and she had family in western Colorado, but we knew one person in Boulder, so we had no reason to come to Boulder other than random.
Mm-hmm.
That guy that we knew, by the way, moved away about 3 months later. So when we were here, we moved here with the idea that our worst case was that we just keep going west, right? I don't like the Bay Area. I like San Francisco as a city for about 3 days, and then it's overwhelming to me. South of San Francisco, the peninsula, classical Silicon Valley, I can't stand the culture, the dynamic. It's not, in the same way that Boston's not my place.
Yeah.
Not my place. I could imagine living in Seattle, but Amy hates the rain, loves the sun. Like that was the barrier to that conversation. And I was already investing in companies in Boston, New York, Seattle, San Francisco, and LA. So I was already crisscrossing the country all the time because of my angel investments. I had deep networks in each place for different reasons. Boston was obvious. New York, I had was close to Boston. I developed some close friends in New York that were entrepreneurs, so I started making some angel investments there. Seattle was, I had very deep links into Microsoft because of my first company and then Ameridata. LA, my largest client in my first company for several years was based in LA, so I had a handful of clients there and I'd gotten to know people. San Francisco, just because there was so much stuff going on there even in the 90s, and I had a bunch of friends from MIT that had gone to California. So Boulder was convenient because it was close to DIA.
Which just opened in
Which had
1995.
just opened.
How about that?
In fact, we were within the first couple of months of it opening. And the previous time I'd been here, I'd flown through Stapleton. And it's unbelievably disorienting to think you're flying into Stapleton and then realize you're in this totally different thing. So we moved here. We rented a house up in Pine Brook Hills because we didn't really know Boulder. It was very impulsive. We came out here. We decided in October to move from Boston, and we were here on November 7th. Our friends in Boston had been hearing for years about how we hated Boston. This is not where we're going to live forever. Just all this sort of normal bitching and whining that you do in your 20s when you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life. And then one day we just had a moving truck come and took it all away, and our friends were like, where'd they go? Right? I still had a ton of stuff in Boston, so for many years I would be in Boston on an almost monthly basis. But within 6 months of being here, we knew this was it for the duration, and have been here ever since.
Wow. Well, in your book, you have covered a lot of things about the context in Boulder and what we have here, and very fortunate to have. But one of the chapters you get to is universities, and particularly kind of shine the light on CU Boulder, but really connect it to what universities are doing in general. So as we look at it, one of the things you observe is one of the most important things the university does is create a continuous stream of new young people to join the entrepreneurial community. What else do they add? What else comes out of that university besides our new graduates?
So I wrote the book in 2012, and just for a little context, I started thinking about the notion of what became called startup communities in 2010. There was an article, a couple of articles, one specific one in a magazine called The American that a friend of mine wrote, Ben Kaznoka, who was for a number of years, he's young, he's in his late 20s now, but was Reid Hoffman at LinkedIn's chief of staff, had written a book, has written 2 books with Reid, Startup Review and The Alliance, and had written his own book as an entrepreneur when he was in high school. And I met him when he was 14, so we've been friends for a long time. And he's almost like extended family to me and Amy in some way. We get together once a year, for 3 or 4 day weekend, and we adore Ben. And it's been amazing to watch and wonderful to watch his progress as a person. He wrote an article that highlighted Boulder that ended up in this magazine called The American, which is I'd never heard of before, but is apparently very popular among a strata of intellectual thinkers. And he talked about all this stuff that was happening in Boulder around entrepreneurship in 2010. So remember the time frame. 2010 is we're still sort of on the edge of the financial crisis, right? We're no longer in the dark depths of it that we were in 2008, 2009, but it's now called the Great Recession. Yeah. And all of this stuff globally, the global macro's all fucked up, and banks are all screwed up, and governments are in distress, and, right? And entrepreneurship just sort of carried on. Yeah. And in fact, in Boulder, the economy here locally was very strong through all that. In hindsight, it's a pretty clear story to tell. The reason that all the local stores in downtown Boulder mostly stayed in business and did just fine through that when cities all over the country and all over the world were having all of their local stores, local retail, local restaurants, boarded up, was because everybody on the second and third floor makes $100,000 a year. They got to eat, right? And they're going to buy stuff if there's stuff to buy. So you had this sort of, while they're small companies, they have high-paid employees, and they have the ones as they're growing. There's plenty of mortality in those companies, but as they're growing, very powerful dynamics in the local ecosystem. And Ben wrote about this. Yeah. And I started thinking about it, I'm like, there's something special going on here. And, the Techstars thing had now expanded. We started it in Boulder in 2007. We did just Boulder in 2008 because we didn't know whether the thing we had done the first year made any sense, so we just wanted to do exactly the same thing again. Fix the things that we'd done wrong or that we didn't like. We had a lot of people come to us in year 2. In 2008, we probably could have done 20 accelerators around the country, around the world. And we basically just said no to all that. We don't have a clue if this is a good idea or not, but here we'll share with you all the stuff we're doing. So we're very open with what we were approaching, how we were thinking about things. And in fact, several of those accelerators, the most notable being one that started that year called Accelerate, which was in Chicago, 4 years later became Techstars Chicago.
All right.
So they didn't have to. They could have
Yeah.
continued to be Accelerate. But they decided to be instead of, we wanted to do something in Chicago. We had close relationships with them.
Right.
There was a long arc. And so it became natural for that program, and Troy Hanikoff, who runs that, to do Techstars Chicago. So all of these things we're building, but we'd done Techstars in Boston in 2009. We'd started Seattle in 2010. We were starting to talk about New York, which happened in 2010 also, maybe 2011. And I started reflecting on all these things between 2010 and 2011, started writing about them on my blog, and then in 2012 wrote this book. At the time, in 2010, the phrase startup communities did not exist.
Right.
Didn't exist. It was entrepreneurial ecosystems, regional clusters, innovation cluster, innovative campus,
Yeah.
innovation zone. And entrepreneurial ecosystem was probably the most common one, which is why that phrase is in the title. But I really wanted a different phrase because I hated the phrase entrepreneurial ecosystem. I just didn't like it. It was hard to spell. It didn't feel right. And it didn't give a sense of what was going on. Like, we're going to go build an entrepreneurial ecosystem feels very different than we're going to go create a startup community.
Right.
One's not very accessible, the other is. It's kind of remarkable to me that 5 years later the phrase startup communities is now the phrase for it. It's, you think about things that you do that you don't expect will be meaningful contributions, and sometimes it's as simple as a phrase like that. So I'm proud of that. At the time, even in 2012 when the book came out, the conventional wisdom was that to be successful at building an entrepreneurial ecosystem, you had to have a research university at the center, and that research university was an anchor of the startup community, or the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So you couldn't create a Silicon Valley, you couldn't create a Boston without having an MIT or a Stanford.
Yeah.
And I thought that was total bullshit. It's not that is not additive to the dynamic, but that's the center point. Made no sense to me. And for better or for worse, Boulder was a good example of that, because CU Boulder in 2010, 2012 was not terribly entrepreneurial, right? The dean of science and engineering that maybe couldn't spell the word, right?
That's not me. He's not talking about me.
The idea that the law school had become the convening
yeah.
point in the university for the startup community was a very powerful construct and an interesting insight to me. And it helped me develop this premise of the notion of leaders versus feeders. And the one thing I did wrong in the book, I'll have not a second edition, but I'm going to write a sequel. It's not Startup Communities Part 2. I'll figure out something else to call it. But that is, I didn't do a good job of articulating the importance of both leaders and feeders in the book. So for the first year or so, I was constantly realizing that I had to explain to people that feeders were important. It wasn't a derogatory phrase.
Right.
It wasn't,
Right.
these are the leaders and these are the feeders. It's that they were different categories. And in hindsight, I should have called them apples and papayas, right? Like I came up with label, and I just didn't think hard about the label because I wasn't thinking hard about any of that, because I was trying to get the underlying construct right. And what I came to was that the leaders have to be entrepreneurs, and every startup community or every ecosystem and every city, you see these cycles, but in the absence of having the entrepreneurs driving it, nothing sustains. So I'd been to lots and lots of places that had, an incubator, a lab, a research thing. Incubator's been around since the mid-1950s or late 1950s. So this stuff's been going on for a long time. Governments spend tons of money all around the world building out, research clusters. So lots of physical infrastructure, lots of lab space, lots of this. But if there's no entrepreneurs who are driving what's going on, it didn't work. It also came to this notion of networks versus hierarchies.
Yeah.
And trying to explain that one of the problems that people have is that the feeder organizations, government, university, big businesses, service providers, investors, nonprofits supporting entrepreneurship, Most, not all of those organizations are hierarchical, right? You gain power in those organizations by conforming to the organizational norm and moving up the organization. Universities, interestingly, are two parallel hierarchies, right? It's the, the administrative hierarchy and then the research and teaching hierarchy. And in some universities, MIT, it's actually three hierarchies because research and teaching hierarchy separate. There's some overlap, but they also separate. So you get this place where the hierarchy, your power dynamics are very, very well defined in a hierarchy. And in the startup company, anybody that's been part of a startup, it's a mess.
Yeah, it's chaos.
Right? It's chaos. And yeah, sure, you have a CEO and you might have some hierarchy, but anybody in the organization can walk into the CEO's office and say anything he or she wants if that's the cultural norm of the company.
Right.
Cultural norm of the company is not that, you have a different issue. Startup communities work the same way startups do, is that you want it to be a network model, not a hierarchical model. And the most powerful way to describe this is somebody once said to me, Brad, you're the king of the Boulder startup community. I said, please don't ever call me that again. Yeah, my node is big, but I'm just a node on the network. I'm not the king. You don't have to ask me permission to do anything.
Right.
You don't have to like my stuff. You don't have to support my stuff. You don't have to engage with my stuff. If you want to, great. If you don't, awesome. If you want to do something that looks like something I'm doing, that's great, because my view is it's not a zero-sum game. So I'm not going to be the king that says, well, if you want to do that, you got to do it my way.
Right.
And I came to this notion where I could make that a generic construct, which is a startup community doesn't have a president. A startup community doesn't have a VP finance. A startup community doesn't have a VP membership, doesn't have a VP of education. It just has a bunch of people doing stuff. And the way your node gets bigger is not the number of connections you have. That's only half of it. It's what travels across the connections. So if you have a bunch of connections but no activity on them, your node on the network's really small. If you have very few connections, your node on the network's very small. If you have a medium number of connections and a lot of activity going across them, your node's huge. It's not that you have to have a ton of connections and a ton of activity, right? It's that you're modulating the balance. Fold this back into the university. When I started talking about this, I started to say, the university has so many assets, and by default, the asset they have is fresh meat. Right? By default, every year, new people show up in town. So you can't take that asset away until you shut the university down. Okay, good. Let's start with that.
Yeah.
And by the way, most people that go to college, independent of the quality of the college, the level in the hierarchy of the college, most people who go to college are trying to learn. They're interested in learning, right? Take the margin out, right? Let's assume that's the goal.
Those are stick.
Right? And this dynamic then is the energy that goes into what's happening in the university. The university actually doesn't try to create a hierarchy around the students.
Right.
The university creates a hierarchy around how it runs so that the students have a context to operate in. And what I tried to come to, and again, I didn't do it as artfully as I could in the book now that I've had 5 years of, or 4 years
Yeah.
of, well, thinking and feedback and having to have the conversations around it. The university starts by being a convening point, not just for the students who are interested in entrepreneurship, but the community to link them to the students. Every startup community I'm in is desperate when they're growing for more smart people. And the best place to find smart people who are relatively inexpensive and already in your city is a university.
Right. Students.
Right? So to try to get that linkage to happen is very powerful. Universities tend to have lots of big spaces, which lots of small companies don't have. So being a convening place, being a place where people can gather in this network model. However, if it's come to me, that breaks the paradigm.
Yeah.
Because entrepreneurship is all about getting out there and making shit happen. And I have had this thing with business schools forever, and anybody here that's involved in CU and the business school, I'm sure Ashley's heard me say this, but others that have had to put up with this. This didn't come from CU. This came from my experience at MIT. In the 1990s, I was involved in MIT starting an entrepreneurship center. And they put the entrepreneurship center in exactly the wrong place. They put it in the business school. At MIT, the business school is all the way at one end of campus. And MIT's campus is a city campus, but it's
Long,
a enclosed city campus, right? So it's in Cambridge, but it's sort of, I would say it's not rolling hills and lots of beautiful fields. It's lots of buildings, but it's in a city. So Sloan is at one end. The student living stuff is at the other end, although integrated in parts of it. And then in the middle is all the action, all the research labs, all the different buildings, and MIT's buildings are very hodgepodge, unlike CU's. It's very creative architecture rather than very sort of conforming architecture, different style. But if you were an entrepreneur, if you were a person in a lab working on something entrepreneurial, the idea that you would wander all the way to the end of campus to the business school made no sense. The problem is the business school students would go sit in the entrepreneurship center and wait for stuff to come to them. Which is exactly wrong. And I would say over and over again to my what is it when you're in the same program and you graduate? I mean, they're alums, but we're all in the same cohort. Yeah, I mean, I got it. It's an MS, not an MBA, because they didn't have MBAs when I went there, but it's the equivalent. I say, get your ass out of this place. Go across campus. Like, all the fun is in Building 36, and all the fun is in the Media Lab. And they'd be like, where's Building 36? I'm like, you weren't an undergraduate here. You don't understand. Like, there's a tunnel between this and Building 36. Go take the tunnel. You need to smoke a joint? Here's where you smoke the joint. But the dynamic of trying to get that movement across campus, the thing that was so interesting to me about MIT and the campus is that there was this huge concentration of entrepreneurial activity in Kendall Square,
Right.
which was it was adjacent to campus. So you literally walk off campus and you're in Kendall Square, or you walk from Kendall Square into campus. And I looked at CU and said, you got the same thing. The problem is nobody from CU is walking to downtown Boulder. Right? It's a 5-minute walk. It's a red bicycle ride for 3 minutes. Like, not on today, but right? It's not hard. Okay, maybe it's a 10-minute walk. Sorry, not a 5-minute walk. So that was step 2.
Mm-hmm.
Step 3 was teaching people in the hierarchy the word entrepreneurship. The way you teach it is bottom up, not top down. And I've seen this play out over and over again.
Yeah.
It's people like you who decide, I'm going to learn what this thing is. I want to go do this. I got students that are asking for it. Where's Green Street? Greg, how many of you are in Greg's class? Bunch of people in Greg's class. All right, same thing. How many of you are here because Greg made you? No, don't answer that one yet. How many of you have some interest in entrepreneurship? Right? Did that come because the chancellor said entrepreneurship's an important part of CU? Or did that come because you were exposed to Greg as a teacher who's a co-founder, or not a co-founder, an early employee, and VP of engineering of a fast-growing startup that's now part of Twitter?
Yes.
Right? That's right. It wasn't the chancellor, it was Greg, right? So raise your hand, say yes, so that everybody that okay. How many of you do it because the chancellor said you should care about entrepreneurship? Right? It comes bottom up.
Yeah.
And what happens is that the hierarchies respond to that rather than trying to push it down. And that was the big insight that I don't think I do well in the book. It's not that universities can't do it, it's that you've got to get this mind share shift of we are going to do this, and we are going to enforce it on the community, to the opposite, which is we want to engage with the community, we want to connect to the community, we want to give the community whatever we can, students, space, resources, smart people, and we want to learn from the community by getting them to come here and help our students be teachers, be mentors, be part of the program, support entrepreneurs who want to start a co-working space, whatever it is. That cycle starts, and I see that cycle now. CU, it's been 4 years since I started, shouting about it. It's probably been 2015. So probably Phil Weiser and Brad Bernthal probably started really engaging in the late 90s. Late 2000 odds. So like 2008, 2009 was about the time that they really started engaging. 2007 they engaged. Phil came back to be dean in like 2010 or 2011. Right? So that started accelerating that way. 4 years later, I mean, it's a grass fire.
Yeah.
You start the grass fire. Mm-hmm. And for those of you in other, at other colleges, like, think of it that way. rather than the natural, okay, we got to create a program around entrepreneurship, and we've got to figure that out, and we've got to hold it on tight. No, turn it inside out.
Well, that whole,
Thanks for letting me rant about that.
that's okay, but
Hope that
what's
was
really
useful.
fun about that is that comparison between the hierarchy of the university and the networking of the ecosystem of entrepreneurship or the startup community. And one of the questions I had was, how do we continue to reinforce that? You know, so we don't want to, in fact, interesting enough, the chancellor convened a committee. We have to have an institute, or we have to have a vice chancellor in charge. And fortunately, the deans, Phil and Dave Eichenberry and Rob Davis, said, no, don't do that. And they listen.
Yeah.
So now we're back to, okay, well, what do we do? Where do we go next? How do we continue to facilitate and enable that student network that really needs to grow?
So I think there's a really easy solve for it. And I was I'm on the Chancellor Advisory Committee. Twice a year we get together with DeStefano and his team, and we have interesting conversations. And 2 of them ago, so a year ago, the focus was on entrepreneurship, and the question was, should CU has become a top 20 research university.
Right.
And it took it 2 decades to get there, about it.
Right, mid-'80s.
And it was a very deliberate effort over a long period of time to become a top 20 research university. Should we take the same approach and become an entrepreneurial university? Not should we stop being a research university and become an entrepreneurial university, but what does it mean for us to go on that journey?
Right.
And I thought it was a really healthy set of conversations with a bunch of people, lots of ideas, sort of your classic advisory board meeting where there's lots of talking and you have no idea whether anything is actionable at the end. But the thing that was interesting to me a year ago was that it had surfaced to the point of being able to have that conversation. Step 1. Step 2 is the thing that always happens. Okay, let's go execute this. And whenever a hierarchy tries to execute it, right, it convenes a team,
Right.
it builds a structure, right, and all of a sudden it starts trying to hang stuff off it. Fortunately, you had a couple of deans who said, wrong approach.
Right.
And you had a chancellor who not only respects those deans, but respects some of the people that contribute the information into it, who said, okay, got it. What's the right approach?
Yeah.
The right approach is take a 20-year view,
Yeah.
just like the 20-year view you took for building a research institute. It's going to take a long time. There's going to be ups and downs. Things are going to change. You want to be at the forefront of the phenomena, but you want to be at the forefront of the phenomena by continually doing things. Doing things reinforces the entrepreneurial cycle. And one of the big differences between doing things and having things done to you is that in a research context, a research institute, a lot of things are done to you.
Right.
Right? You spend a lot of time getting that NSH grant or that NIH grant, and now you have the funding, but that funding is configured to support the grant dynamics. That's not bad. That's how that works. Entrepreneurship is completely orthogonal to that. There is no granting organization that's going to give you the money.
Right.
And in fact, the money's going to come when a company that Fletcher starts becomes worth $1 billion, and Fletcher all of a sudden is worth $100 million, and he turns around and gives a $10 million gift to CU. That's how it works. Right? So the difference is you have to not take the traditional approach of trying to build out it institutionally, but instead you have to continue to operate in this chaotic, messy world that is the notion of a startup. Now, I run into this phenomena continually, and CU will run into this phenomenon probably in the next couple of years, is two things collide. One is the global macro changes your priorities. So if anybody thinks that we'll never have a downturn again, you're delusional, right? So we will. It's the way it works. And we don't know when. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen in 10 years. Doesn't matter. It could impact the entire economy. It could only impact people that make food that is grown naturally, organically. It could affect a broad demographic of business. It could just affect the healthcare and insurance industry. It could have second-order effects. It could have none. That's just a natural thing that happens. Universities have this incredible base to ride that out, which is their endowment, right? So you have a very, very solid economic base that you can ride out. And the risk, though, is that when you're on a 20-year mission, you get a bump like that. You stop your mission. You don't drive through. part of my message in this book to entrepreneurs around their startup communities is, you're going to have that problem. Keep playing.
Keep driving through.
And I get this now, everybody. We've been at this for 3 or 4 years. I've been a leader in the, Topeka startup community. I'm really having trouble getting da-da-da-da-da, and, I'm not earning enough money, and I'm thinking about getting a job. And my answer is, that's totally cool.
Yeah.
Right? Like, do you believe that you're still on a 20-year mission? Yes. Well, go get a job so you can eat and keep working on the startup community. They're not mutually exclusive. Right? Don't feel bad that you're 4 years into it and it's not everything you wanted it to be in year one, or that the excitement of the first 2 or 3 years has now turned into, oh, this is harder than I thought. It is.
It is hard.
But you have to keep doing it.
And part of that in the university is we're going to keep doing our research run stuff. It's still going to go on, but this can go alongside it.
That's right.
And then hopefully we can start building some connections.
Well, I think they're not. This is again a very important one. They're not mutually exclusive, and it's something Rick and I were talking about earlier. I mean, there's a lot of people in a university context that have absolutely no interest in entrepreneurship, and that's totally fine.
Okay.
Because that's why they want to be in a university context.
Right.
So it's not that you're trying to make people do things they don't want to do. You're trying to create room for people to do what they want to do. Yeah. And again, this is the network versus
The
hierarchy, right? A network model says you can do what you want to do. Go do it, right? Go start something. You have a vision, you have a dream, you have a desire, go start. Versus, hey, can I do this?
Yeah.
And you want to be on the side of not ever having to ask, hey, can I do this, in the context of a startup community. Sure, there are points in time where you have to, hey, is it okay that we're camping out in your space for free? And now there's 7 of us. Are you okay with that still? No, actually, you should probably go find an office. Like, there are dynamics. You have to behave well. One of my suggestions to people is, if you're taking things, just doing things, the best way to get somebody to do something for you is to do something that benefits them before you ask them for something. So I get people every day, a long list of people asking me for things. Every day. That's fine. I give people lots of stuff every day. The people I pay attention to are the people who bring me something I need and then ask me. And especially if the thing they bring me helps me do the thing they're asking me. It's so easy to help that. In fact, it's not that you feel an obligation to, it's just easy. The potential energy is so low, right? Versus the day-long list of, and it gets even more depersonalized. You could imagine being on the receiving end all day long of emails, 300 to 500 emails a day. And, I don't know, on a bad day, there's probably 25 of them that are, Dear Mr. Feld, I'm looking for a job. Here's my resume attached, right? Unless there's something in it that actually engages me, I just hit delete. Like, I can't even deal with it anymore. Versus if somebody says, hey, I'm thinking about moving to Boulder, I've looked at your portfolio, there are 3 companies I'd love an intro to, here's my background, or I'm thinking about moving to Boulder, can you meet with me to talk about Boulder? No, I can't, but I'd be happy to make some interest to other people, like some context versus Dear Mr. Feld, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing across the whole ecosystem. And it's especially true in a university, right? Find the subversive professors.
There are a few.
Right? There are plenty. I know lots of them. They're my friends here at CU. Find the ones who are willing to try some things that are different. Find the ones who want to support you on a journey that's different. Let them keep building.
Right. Well, just a couple more and then we're going to open up. So one of the things when we first met, I said, you asked me, well, what's the mission of this accelerator we were talking about? And I said, well, we want to start up businesses and we want to educate our students. And you and Dave both kind of simultaneously said, that's BS. You can't do that, which got my attention. And it's interesting, it was reinforced in my conversation with several others from other universities. And so we really stepped back. It caused us to relook at it and understand that, our mission as a university is to educate. And so we really want to enrich our students' experience, to help them learn. And if we can promote their business and to grow it, then that's great. That's an add-on. But we really have to be about education. Anything you can add to that, or the way we might think about our accelerators on our campuses, on how we take that view?
I think the first year or two, I think we encourage you. When we talked in the same conversation, the first time you run it, you're going to get a whole bunch of stuff wrong. And that's how it works. Like,
Sure.
you have to be ready for that. You have to be comfortable with the idea that it's going to be sloppy, that you're going to make a lot of mistakes. You're going to look back and say, wow, we should have done that this way, and we shouldn't have tried that. And that's all normal. And my view is the second year that you do it, that you run an accelerator program in any context, but especially in university context, it's going to be the same. You're going to make different mistakes the second year because you're now feeling like that. You've got to set that expectation with students, mentors, faculty, and the administration. We are not going, if you say we're going to have 10 companies or 5 companies and 3 of them are going to get funded, that's a dumb place to start. Right? You're just setting yourself up to fail. Right? What you say is, we have a bunch of students that want to start companies. We're going to do this in a very, very powerful but lightweight way. And what our goal is to help the students learn how to better start their companies, bring lots of resources to them, And while we're doing that, we're going to learn how to do this better.
Do the thing at the accelerator itself,
By the time you get to year 3, I think there's a noticeable shift, which is you start to be comfortable with the rhythm. Like it's not, you have to learn how to run an accelerator. That's not the magic. It's not the learning how to run it. It's understanding how to actually engage in it full time. The emotion of it, the things that are good, the things that are bad, how to deal with all the crazy stuff that comes up amongst the students, between the students, with mentors that you didn't expect. Not just the logistics of the day by day, right? You get through that. But by year 3, you're starting to build some ideas and some framework around how to do it for the population of your students, of the kinds of people you're attracting, the skill sets of the people at the university, of the skill sets of the mentor group. Bill All at MIT, who runs the MIT Entrepreneurship Center, has the Founders Skills Accelerator, FSA is what he calls it. And I think they've done 5 or 6 programs now. And he wrote a book called Disciplined Entrepreneurship, which is his framework for how to do what he likes to call disciplined entrepreneurship, a basic startup using this approach. And that's what they teach, right? That's their curriculum in the context of it. He didn't start with that book and apply it to the program. He started with the program and emerged the book, the book emerged from it. Bill, I like Bill a lot, and I'm very, very supportive of his approach. He should have disciplined entrepreneurship version 2 in a couple of years from what he's learned about what worked and didn't work. And if he doesn't, then he's made a mistake. Right? So it's that kind of process. The last thing which we've learned at Techstars is you have to have a continual sense of renewal within the program. So it's very easy to get burned out. Now you have an opportunity for that in the context of the university because every 4 years, you have people that are juniors and seniors, they engage deeply, and then they go on to the next thing. So you constantly have to be moving that through. In some ways, it's easier in a university context to do that. And that's another layer of it, because what you're really doing is you're helping develop leaders and managers by having the program and having them be the ones that are actively engaged in running the program. So that's some of the dynamics.
So bring them into it. That's good. That's really good. Well, my last set question I do want to ask you is, a number of our schools, ours included, have come up with this term entrepreneur in residence. And we employ people to come in and kind of be a seed person, an idea person. Have any views on that? Seen them work? Any insight on that?
Yeah, I think the title is fine. It's now suitably generic across lots of things. Venture capital firms used in EIR for a while. I was actually an entrepreneur in residence at the Kauffman Foundation in the 1990s. Between like 90, I don't remember the time, from 96 and 99, something like that, 95 and 99. I actually was so embarrassed by the title. I said, basically, it's a fancy title for, they pay me a little bit of money to come hang out with them for a day a month, which is what they did. And I hung out and worked on stuff. I think that the thing that is most useful is this idea of getting people who are entrepreneurs, who are in between things, who want to engage with the university and with students, actively engaged in these programs, is super powerful. I think that the mistake is to try to make that a captive phenomenon. So if it's, you're an entrepreneur in residence and you can't do anything else, that's dumb. If it's, hey, you're an entrepreneur in residence, but You want to start working on your new company? We got some resources for you.
Yeah.
You want to help some other companies as a consultant? Awesome. Like, it's not a, here's your conflict of interest policy that you have to sign
Right.
to be an EIR. It's much more of a lightweight, this is a way to get you engaged with us. And you should turn the EIRs over. So I like to, whenever you do a relationship like this, you should never do a relationship that's longer than a year. You should set the, even if it's not an economic relationship,
Yeah.
you're an EIR, it's a one-year thing. At the end of a year, we're going to sit down and talk about whether to do it for another year.
Yeah.
And at the end of that, okay, it's a one-year thing. We're going to sit down and talk about what, because the person might be looking, hey, you know, I've done this for 3 years. It's time for me to not do this anymore. Or it might be somebody who's not engaged, and then you can have the direct but hard conversation, which is, hey, you know, you really didn't do anything here. This didn't really work.
Yeah.
You know, let's move on. So I think if you approach it that way, it's very powerful. And I'll just emphasize the warning again. Don't end up in a world where you are trying to capture people in the context of the university by calling them an EIR or something
Yeah.
like that. And don't be afraid to hold people to a standard of what that means.
Yeah.
And if they're not participating in the standard, even if they've got a big name, like I would be a bad EIR at CU because I wouldn't spend the time here that would be appropriate for an EIR. You might say, yeah, but Brad, it'd be so nice to have Brad Feld, EIR of CU Boulder. I'm like, yeah, but that's actually not good because it cheapens what that means in the context of the value to you as a university. So just keep it that way. It's not about collecting names. It's not about, you know, capturing people. It's about getting people to really engage deeply and giving them a vehicle for that.
Yeah. The activity. It's again that node and the ways across it. Good, good, good. Well, thanks. Questions from you guys? Anything that's on your mind? Right.
We talk a lot about student entrepreneurs and fostering entrepreneurship within the university. Can you talk a little bit about what a university can do for the existing entrepreneurs in the community?
Yeah, I mean, it varies a lot.
Brad, can you repeat your question?
Oh, sure. What can a university do for existing entrepreneurs in the community? And by the way, if you need to leave, just leave. It never bothers me. I'm just trying to shame the person walking out. Thank you for coming. My mother hates it when I do that. She always gets up and leaves. But no, seriously, people have other things to do. Just do what you need. There are a couple of things a university can do to help the local startup community, help the entrepreneurs. One is a lot of entrepreneurs are working on things that have overlap with research that's happening in university. At some point in society's life, and I hope we have some leadership at CU around it, we will fix the technology transfer dynamics. One of the problems with the technology transfer dynamics are that unless you, in most cases, unless you operate in the context of how the university wants to work, you can't really make a lot of progress against that as an entrepreneur. And as a result, many high-quality entrepreneurs who have some overlap with research don't bother because the cost of bothering is too high.
Yeah.
And it's not just economic cost, it's the time, it's the engagement, it's done. Now, that doesn't necessarily hold true for professors or researchers in the university who are trying to spin technology out, but it makes it hard to go the other direction. There's relatively easy fixes to that, but it takes a philosophical change in that boundary. So that's one, is that if you're an entrepreneur and there's overlap with something in a university. Second is, I'll come back to this notion of fresh meat, right? I mean, the best recruiting for many of the companies that we're involved in are from CU and from other universities. If you have a vibrant set of engineering programs, whether it's computer science or life science or whatever, that can feed in. One of the challenges is the traditional career development office process doesn't work because that's set up for companies like IBM. They're not set up for companies like GNIP. And so the thing the university can do is turn it on its head. And by the way, that's mostly a student-driven phenomenon. Fletcher was involved, so you probably know the history better than me. But my impression is that Student to Startup, which is the reverse recruiting event that happens once a year in the software community here, where the students organize an event and 10 or 15 companies come in and pitch them. And then they have a chance after the companies have pitched, the students that are interested go to the companies and spend more time with them, and that turns into an interview process. That's very different than, I'm here today, would you like to come interview with me? Which doesn't really work. It's not efficient for the startups, and it's not a good way to get access to the students. So figuring out how to turn that dynamic around is powerful. The next is recognize as a university that you're really playing a zero-sum game, right? You're trying to help your students. Helping your students is your mission. If you want to help your students, what you want to do is get them into the startup community and make that easy. Most startups have this, again, rapacious need for talent, and it can be at the undergraduate level before people are looking for jobs. So we have a thing here that started out of Startup Colorado called Startup Summer. And there's a bunch of students apply for it, a bunch of companies apply for it, they match. All of these things are creating glue on the network, right? If you think about where I'm coming back to, it's all relatively straightforward things, but that are non-traditional, right? They're not in a boundary, they're across a network.
Well, internships, we're working on internships to try to figure out from the startup community, what are internships available? How can we match them up? So we were talking about an app that matches internships with students on campus, so same kind of thing.
The last thing I'll do on that thread, which is kind of the other direction, which is why should a university invest that way? And invest their energy that way, independent. Okay, let's get past this is what the job of the university is, to educate and help their students. But why should they invest this way? Especially in a context where, well, but that company hasn't given us any money to support our university. My favorite example of this is that the two founders of Google, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, each gave Stanford $1 billion as a gift. That's how it works, right? You help your students become successful. They will have long-term affinity, and that will contribute back to the university. So you have to invest ahead of the return as a university. And I think that goes across so many things. That's hard. It's easy to say, it's hard to do. It's especially hard to do, for example, we have this problem in Colorado where CU, it's rumored that CU is a state university. Rumored. But like 4% or 5% of the budget is from the government. And the only reason, since I moved here, I'm like, why don't we privatize CU? And the only reason is that the government, the state owns all the buildings and all the land. So, cool, go ahead and privatize, and well, here's the rent you have to pay, right? It doesn't work, because it's not in the, the incentive structure's not right. But it's really easy to lose sight of what those dynamics are when you feel pressure because I have X dollars, and here's the dollars I need to fund these programs, and why am I helping these things that don't have a short-term payout? I think the best thing a university can do on this stuff is have a long view.
One of the fundamental principles I know you say in here, and you and Dave say it all the time, is give before you get. That principle, and that's what's right. That's what you're talking about. Another question. Somebody.
Oh, come on. Go ahead.
Somebody in the back, yeah.
So, as a student here, what would you suggest as the number one thing we should do in order to help us get more involved in the startup communities outside of campus?
Show up and do shit. That's it. You're a student, you're busy, you got lots of demands on your time, you got like actually classes and stuff you have to go to and papers you got to write. If you're interested in entrepreneurship, show up and do things. And don't.
Right. There's this whole community of meetups. This is what I tell my students every day. A half mile down the road, you can go and be part of the big data meetup. You can go and be part of science. You can go and be part of any technology, entrepreneurial meetup. Those didn't exist when I was in school.
Yeah.
Right. And not only will you learn things, but you'll start to build your network within the community of entrepreneurs like myself who will be there, who will be looking to give jobs to people. Right. And it's almost trivial and simply free.
Right.
Right.
Very, very powerful example. Another thing that I think is advice on that vector is pick a thing you're really interested in. Don't pick something you're not that interested in, but you feel like, oh, well, I'll just show up and see what it is. Pick a thing you're really interested in and do everything around that for 6 months. So if you're interested in big data, go on meetup.org, find out where the Boulder Big Data Meetup is. You'll find out that there's a couple of other things around big data that are probably happening. Go to all of them for 6 months, or for a semester, for 4 months. The problem that so many people make when, and this is not student, this is generic, is when you try to engage with something like this, you go too broad and not deep enough. Right? You show up one time at a thing, and then you show up one time at another thing, and you show up one time at another thing. And after a couple of months, you're like, I don't really know anybody. I'm always the guy or gal that's showing up, and like I feel like the new person in the room. You go to an event that's a monthly event, fourth time you go, first time you go, you're like, what's going on? Second time you go, you're like, okay, I kind of know what the drill is, and I recognize that person over there. Maybe I'll go talk to them. The third time you go, you actually end up afterwards going out to dinner with 3 or 4 people that go every time and that have recognized you and that you had a conversation with. By the fourth time, you're a regular. And as a student, like, it's so helpful at many, many levels, right? It helps you develop that muscle of getting integrated into a totally new social group from nothing. If you pick something that's interesting to you, well, it's going to captivate you and you're going to spend a lot of time on it, separate from whatever that periodic event is. You're going to meet people who are at all spectrum, whether they're students or, you know, entrepreneurs or engineers or whatever, who are interested in that same domain. So you're going to start to vibrate around with some random people in the domain. And then to what Greg said, you're going to make real connections. Once you've done that once, you can replicate that multiple times, right? It's not that you have to stick to one thing forever. And it's not that you should not do other things, but go deep on at least one thing over a period of time.
That's good. Good. Yes.
So, on the academic, you said about the entrepreneurship center or the academic program, or both, should not be in business school, should be closer physically to the more innovative and hard sciences, things like that. Can you comment a little further on exactly what you meant there?
I gave the MIT problem. And by the way, if Bill was here, he'd say, yeah, we solved that. We moved it to building 40. For those of you that don't know MIT, building 40 is 100 yards away from Sloan. It's the next building over. It's not part of the business school campus. It's literally the next building over. It was a cheat. And clever, but you know, to Bill's credit, I mean, they've made that much more. It's much more of a convening place, and it's very powerful. But it's not directly in the business school anymore.
And that was the center, or also the academic faculty teaching entrepreneurship?
Entrepreneurship Center.
Okay.
The faculty at MIT is a special case because of the dynamics around it. There's literally the entrepreneurial arc at MIT. If you're in the building that's CSAIL, Computer Science AI Laboratory, you walk down the hall, and 1 out of every 3 or 4 offices is an entrepreneur who's a founder, professor, entrepreneur who's a founder of a company that's been very successful, and they're working in their same office that the guy next to them that's an associate professor is working in that hasn't had a successful business. But the culture of entrepreneurship at that level is throughout the campus. And so this notion of trying to build teaching around it is different there than a lot of other places. So I separate that out. The more important part of the message is not the physical location of the building, it's the behavior of the business school students. That was the message that I was trying to get across with the MIT example. If the behavior of the business school students is to hang out in the entrepreneurship center and wait for entrepreneurship to come to them, it ain't going to happen. The business school students have to get out across campus and go find the entrepreneurship. And it's the same thing to some degree for people who are toiling away in any of the labs. If you wait for entrepreneurship to come to you in your lab, none's going to happen. You got to get out of the lab and go find other people who are working on it. So one of the reasons why I like the convening activity to be in the middle of campus, or to be in a part of campus that's not anchored in the business school, is that it gets people that are not naturally business people to think about it because they're passing it all the time. Where if it's over in the business school, it ends up being very isolated. Now, what's happened here is even more complicated. You want to talk about Spark at all? I mean, it's a useful. Are you going to talk about it tomorrow?
A little bit.
Okay, we can talk about it tomorrow. I'll give you the quick story. I mean, Fletcher and a crew, you were an undergraduate when you started it?
Mhm.
Fletcher and a crew of undergrads decided there is no good co-working space for students on campus. Like, we don't have a good place for this. So we're not going to wait for anybody to tell us. We're going to go find some space. They found space up on University Hill. We're going to go raise some money. How much did you raise? $250,000, something like that?
It was like 150.
150. Don't discount it. That's still plenty. They raised 150. They got, they got a couple of eccentric non-CU alums to sponsor things like bathrooms. And they built on the top of University Hill, where students go and hang out all the time, a co-working space for people who wanted to do entrepreneurship. And that's where
we were last summer.
Catalyze, the accelerator was last summer. That's what I'm trying to get to,
Yeah.
right? It's you're trying to get people out of the, oh, I have to go to the blah to do my entrepreneurship, and getting it something people are seeing all the time. Go ahead.
I have another one. if that's-
Sure.
So, can you comment on the best practices you've seen for universities to maybe change or alter the equity? For-profit accelerators traditionally have had, 6% common stock for $20,000, and now there's a movement towards equity, guarantees. So if they're not happy, they can give the equity back.
I'm going to ask Dave about that tomorrow, by the way, so.
There's going to be something on that
Yeah.
tomorrow?
But that's okay. Still a
I'm just
good
curious,
question about the
what-
university.
What's the best practice you've seen? What's working for universities that might be prohibited from taking any equity? And does that remove the economic engine and incentive for everybody involved?
Yeah, I think universities can do accelerators without equity quite effectively. I don't think the equity is the driver in a university model. Because again, the university's mission is the driver. And for the students to be able to do it in a university context without it being dilutive allows them to then go to an accelerator after they go through the accelerator in the university context if they've got something, without getting diluted again.
Yeah.
So I actually think it's quite positive for universities to do it. I don't think it undermines the approach. And I think it also then gets rid of a weird conflict, which in a public and private universities have different versions of this weird conflict. So the CU version of this conflict is different than the MIT version, but they both still have the conflict, which is that your students are paying you to go to school for the educational experience. And what you're trying to do, let's say that something comes out of a student accelerator and ends up being bought for $100 million. If the student doesn't have the affinity and the relationship with the university to turn around and write a check to the university, there's a different problem, right? And so I think you're going to get the return. It might not be mathematically equivalent, but in the success case and in the not-success case, it doesn't matter. The other thing I tell you, the equity-backed guarantee, and again, press on David tomorrow more about this. From Techstars' perspective, we've had 400 or 500 companies go through Techstars at this point. I think we've only had one before we did the equity guarantee of anybody who expressed displeasure for the economic dynamics of what they got relative to it. And even in that particular case, you press David on it tomorrow. My sense in that case, it was an edge case where it's more like to put it in the category. I call up a corp dev person at a company that was looking to buy a company that didn't buy a company of ours, and I premise it by saying, I'm not the whiny VC calling you up to try to convince you to buy this company. I just want to make sure I understand what went wrong in the process. It's kind of the same thing, and for us, the equity-backed guarantee for Techstars was all about lowering resistance on the front end. So we had a lot of people who would look at Techstars and say, I'm not sure this is worth 6% to me.
Right.
And what we said is, no problem. If at the end of it, you don't think it's worth 6%, we have an equity-backed guarantee. Our only request is that you give us a thorough debrief on what we did that disappointed you, didn't live up to your expectation. And it holds us to a standard, it holds the companies to a standard, but it eliminates the resistance as people are thinking about should they participate, because they don't have to make that decision of, well, is there value or not? Well, look, if there's not, these guys will stand by their word. And of all the cases, I think, where somebody has expressed explicitly coming in, we're not sure if it's worth it, at the end they said, totally easy decision to do it. That's why we ended up.
So reflecting back this way, so the university replaces that ecosystem component of the equity of a for-profit accelerator with its mission and the long-term outlook that the student will kind of learn, earn, and return.
Correct. Well said.
Yeah,
Okay.
good.
I like the learn, earn, and return. That's a good.
a good
Seriously, it's a very good line because it's.
Copyrighted by BYU.
Is it really? That's too bad.
Well, but it nails that concept, right? You're investing come back to the give before you get. You're investing in the student. You're giving before you get. You're not saying this is a transactional relationship student. You're saying we're investing in you, and we hope that when you're successful, if you benefited from us investing in you, you'll invest back in us.
That's good. One more question. Yeah.
So if you happen to be one of those captured EIRs, do you have any recommendations, either within the university or the uncaptured?
Set free. If you're happy being a captured EIR, carry on. If you're unhappy, quit and then tell them why you quit and rejoin under uncaptured terms. I think that's the only way to do it. Like, my view of the world is pretty simple. If I'm unhappy with the situation that's going on, trying to navigate slowly through a situation is usually unsuccessful and unsatisfying. And it's a lot easier to, say, here's the problem. It doesn't have to, here's my proposal. It doesn't have to be this, but this is a problem. I'm not going to keep doing this. We need to talk about what it is. And my sense is if the orientation of the institution is to try to capture, the only way you're going to get past that is to say, that doesn't work for me. I'll give you an example of that, actually, that happened to me. Bill Ollett, again, at MIT, called me and said, will you be a mentor for the skills accelerator they do? Right, the first year they were doing it. I said, yep, sure, absolutely. Bill, happy to do anything you want. Happy to help any way I can. Great, awesome, thanks, click. On to the next one. And so, he mobilized it, and he put together his list of mentors, and he's going to formalize it. And he sends me a document. And the document he sends me is a 3-page document that's clearly MIT legalese. And it says, you're a mentor for this, da-da-da-da-da. And by being a mentor, you agree not to have any conflict of interest in any of these companies, including not having any equity before or during the program, and for a period of time after the program, agreeing not to invest in these companies. It's MIT conflict of interest policy that they wanted to put in place. I said, not interesting. He said, why? I said, number one, it's stupid. Number two, isn't the whole point of this, if I'm a mentor, don't you kind of want your mentors to invest in your successful companies?
Yeah.
Right? And number three, I don't sign documents like this because I don't remember what I do, and I got too many things going on. All I'm going to do is set myself up to get sued by somebody. So I'm happy to be a mentor, but I'm not interested in signing a 3-page document to be a mentor. So I wasn't a mentor. I don't have any idea what they did. Didn't ruin my relationship with Bill. Didn't ruin my relationship with MIT. I just said, no, I'm not interested in this. So it wasn't principled. It was just I looked at it and I'm like, I don't agree. So I think it's that kind of dynamic because I don't know whether Bill would say, yes, I've got exactly the mentors I want and I'm super happy and I don't really care whether Brad's a mentor or not. 4 years later, 5 years later. Or he might say, oh yeah, we changed that policy. Shit, I should call Brad again. Right? Or he might say, yeah, we have that policy, but we look the other way. Right? Yeah, it's happened a couple of times. But I think you just have to hit it head on and say, this is why this doesn't make sense from my frame of reference. Let's figure it out.
Good. Yeah.
Brad, if we have students that are in a startup with a mentor, what's, I guess, a reasonable expectation from that mentor that he or she has, they've been successful, but they're busy, they have other things, but they want to give back?
It varies dramatically. So I have the next book I'm working on, I have a book coming out that just came out, it's available on Kindle, called Startup Opportunities. So actually I'll be a book promoter for a second. The book I just wrote answers the question, is this a good idea? So I get asked this question, like the resumes I get every day, I get asked this question, 5 to 10 times a day. I've got this idea for blah, 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 is it any good? And I would tell people, go read Lean Startup. And they go read Lean Startup, and somewhere between a week and a month later, I get an email. I read Lean Startup. Thank you for recommending that. Is this a good idea? Right? Because Lean Startup doesn't answer that question. Lean Startup answers the next question: is I think this is a good idea.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to go. Here's how to go execute. So I wrote a book with a professor at Ryerson, a guy named Sean Weiss, called Startup Opportunities: Know When to Quit Your Day Job. And it's aimed at not replacing any of those books. It's aimed at being like the preface to Disciplined Entrepreneurship, Lean Startup, Lean Launchpad. And it's a example survey book. So it's written like all my other books. It's very, very storytelling. It's lots of substance, but you know, plenty of sidebars, but with some glue that holds it together. And it's aimed at the person that doesn't have a good frame of reference of all the pieces that need to go into translating an idea into one that you're then going to put real effort into. And what is it about the idea and what you have to build around the idea in terms of people and product, and how can you do those sorts of things. So if you like what you heard tonight and you get a free book tonight, and you have a Kindle, Startup Opportunities, $9. The next book I'm writing is a book called Give First, and it'll probably come out next year. I can't imagine that I'll do it. I'll finish it this year. And it's aimed at helping people understand how to be effective mentors. And I've written a series of blog posts. David Cohen wrote a thing 3 or 4 years ago called the Techstars Mentor Manifesto. And I've now written, there's 18 things on the Mentor Manifesto. I've written 10 of the 18 things. By the way, the Techstars Mentor Manifesto should probably be, you know, somewhere between 8 and 10 things. So when, you know, I'm all done and I start cycling through the book, we'll tighten all that stuff up. But the reason I say, so there's a lot of stuff I've written about, and I'd encourage you to go to Feld.com and just type Mentor Manifesto and read through some of those. It varies dramatically because you have a spectrum. You have people who are very, very busy that can engage in a mentor and have special magic skills about, in a very, very short period of time, being able to contribute meaningfully to somebody on that accelerator startup path. At the other end of the spectrum, you have people that have more time, and it takes them a lot more sort of turn of the crank to get to that point of insight because of how they work and how their brain works or however much they've seen. And both ends of the spectrum are totally fine. And then again, you have everything in between, right? So as a mentor, for example, at this point, I've been a mentor for hundreds of companies. I'll say what people say about it when I mentor is that in 5 or 10 minutes, I can cut to a very actionable thing around a very specific topic. And, you know, I can do it on a pretty wide range of tech companies because of my experience. I'm not always right, but I can get to something very, very quickly. Well, I can get to something very, very quickly because I have no time. Right? So I've learned how to cut through it to try to isolate to think. Now, in a mentor context, some entrepreneurs, that's great because they're looking for that. For others, it's the worst thing you could do for them. Right? So I try to work with whoever the MD is. I say, don't give me the entrepreneur that needs somebody that's doing this kind of cycle. Use me surgically, right? Or use me across a group of CEOs to try to help that group of CEOs do a specific thing. For example, understand how to talk to each other about their problems. Or address something that's softer that people are afraid to talk about, right? About, you know, my head's about to explode, how do I deal with it, right? Or, you know, my partner and I are miserable working together, like, what do I do? Like, things that are hard for people to come into without being prescriptive. You know, well, you should solve your problem by doing blah, 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 versus let me give you some empathy, let me listen to you a little bit, let me try to guide you towards some stuff. So it's in some ways, it's understanding what the mentor is really good at, what they have the time dimension for, and then actively, as the leader of the program, matching them up with the right entrepreneur. And I think a mistake that we saw, certainly the first year or two of Techstars, we were much more focused. We were focused on domain experience and personality. And those two dimensions were helpful. I don't know that there's a rigorous matching phenomenon now because a lot of it's self-selection, but we use this process we call Mentor Madness, which is the first 30 days where the mentors meet with lots of different companies and the companies meet with lots of different mentors. And it self-selects pretty well on this dimension of what you have time for and what you have affinity for and where the styles are complementary. And then after that first 30 days, the managing director can be surgical about, hey, Brad, we need some of this on that. Or, hey, Mary, can you help us with this company with that? So it becomes more precise after you get past that first layer.
Yeah, and Mentor Madness or matching really works. Yeah,
one more
Jared,
question. I got
more.
time
Yeah.
for one more.
Yeah, so obviously peer-to-peer mentorship is also really important, as we've seen in Techstars, the CEOs helping each other, startups helping each other. How do you foster that on the university campus? How do you get the students to be helping each other along this journey?
I want to reiterate what you said, because you said it in a way that everybody here should hear loudly. The most valuable mentorship is peer-to-peer mentorship. The best mentor-mentee relationships become peer relationships over time. Len Fassler, who's 80 years old, 82 years old, bought my first company. Len and his partner, Jerry Pock. They're both very, very close friends, great mentors, huge, huge impact on me. I met Len 20 years ago, 1995, 1993 when they bought our company, so 22 years ago. We've been very close for 22 years. For the first 4 or 5, I learned an enormous amount from him. He would say he learned a lot from me, but I think there was a big imbalance. But that imbalance started to normalize, where we were both learning from each other. And Len will say today at 80 whatever, and he said it publicly, I learned more from Brad than Brad learned from me. And I say, no way. Right? I learned way more from you than you learned from me. That's the relationship you're looking for. Yeah. And it can start when you're both 18 years old. It doesn't have to be that, he's whatever, 82 minus 20, however many, he's in his 50s and I'm in my 30s.
Yeah, well, Fletcher, I've seen that time and time again with like the younger and younger tech entrepreneurs more in like online communities. But how do you take that from the online community, put it back into the
Just
physical?
get them together.
Yeah.
It's the same comment before to the person who said, how do I engage?
I mean, we actually saw it within our student groups last summer at Catalyze, is that as they start mentoring each other, because they build a safe community that they can actually interact, and works really well.
I didn't answer your question. You asked it again, which was good, and I'll answer your question now. As human, so I hate the telephone, and I'm happy to meet, but I'm an introvert. I'd actually rather sit in front of my computer all day than do this. I'm fine doing this, but this drains me of energy, which is the definition for me of an introvert. It's easy to lose sight of, especially because we sit in front of a computer or have our phones in front of us all day, how important the physical interaction is in that relationship. Yeah. So in a mentor-mentee relationship, get together. Go for a walk. Greg, is Greg still in the room? What's our best conversations? Walk around the block, right? Our best conversations are walk around the block, right? He has something on his mind that's either aggravating him, important, he wants to explore with me. I have something on my mind. It's not, let's schedule a meeting. It's, hey, can you go for a walk? The same thing with mentor relationships. It's not, hey, we got to schedule a meal to have formality around this. But hey, let's walk across campus. I know your next thing is blah, and I've got some time. I want to talk to you about such and such. Build that physical relationship so the online interactions have richness, right? I don't have to get together with Greg every time I want to talk about something. We can email back and forth as much as we want, right? I don't know if Fletcher considers me a mentor or not, but I think we probably have more interactions by email than we have face-to-face. But we still have some face-to-face. When he walks in the room, the first year when he walked in the room, I didn't know who he was other than I recognized him. And I've seen you before. And then after a year, you're Fletcher. Oh, that guy in my email is named Fletcher. Right? And now when I get an email from Fletcher, it's from Fletcher, and I respond, and I'm really, right? It's just, you have to get those things linked together. And I think it's really easy it's easy today, and I think it's probably especially easy for your generation, because I'm old now and you're younger. It's easier to hide behind the screen for a lot of those things, because it's easier to do. Fine. Don't forget the face-to-face.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, Brad, thank you. Been most
Sure.
gracious. Great fun. Let's give Brad a hand.
A couple of quick things I like to say at the end of every talk I give. My email is brad@feld.com, so if there's anything that we didn't get to, you want to follow up, send me an email. Keep it short. Start with, don't bury the lead. Think of a guy who gets a lot of email a day. I'll try to respond. 2, if there's anything that you heard tonight that didn't make sense or felt uncomfortable or that you violently disagreed with, I'm always open to that kind of feedback. So anything that felt tone deaf, anything that felt like I missed, help me hear that stuff. And I may or may not agree with you, but getting the data is really useful to me. And in some ways, I've learned it's very useful to engage in those conversations, especially around this topic, because it helps us collectively learn more. And then the last is if there's ways I can be helpful, and especially for people in other universities that have come to this event, don't be bashful about asking, because I'll be happy to try to do things. Obviously, the spectrum of it. If you ask me to come give a talk, that's hard. If you ask me a specific thing or a place where I can hop on a phone for 30 minutes with some people in the university, I'm actually happy to do that if that's useful to you. All right.
Thank you. Well, just real quick, you heard that Brad has a great affinity for MIT, and he's often seen with a red MIT t-shirt. So Kyle Judah was coming to join us from MIT, and I asked Kyle to bring a new MIT t-shirt. Now, he was still on Logan Airport runway, and so we didn't make it. We have a Spark Boulder t-shirt, though, for you, Brad. So our thanks to you for giving before you
My
get it.
endless supply of free clothing. My wife said, for a guy who's done all right, you got a lot of free clothing.
All right, thanks. So tomorrow morning we'll start at 8 o'clock in the Idea Forge. If you don't know how to get there, check with us, but we have lots of maps that we've given you. Looks like a great day tomorrow, a lot of interchange and interaction, and again, thanks for coming out tonight. Cool. Awesome. Really appreciate it.
All right, have fun tomorrow.
It should be great. Should be great.
My pleasure. Thanks.
It's some great help, yeah.
It's been a while since I've been to you, but I've been going to the company. Yeah, I was up probably a decade ago for a day and some stuff. It's been a while. So something when you've got some, you've got an event coming up or something that you want to be helpful or engaged with.
Just like what you said, I don't want it to be
It's so
I'm great. I wanted to introduce myself.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no worries.
It was good fun.
Yeah.
You survived, huh?
You did.
Good for you. You've done this before, haven't you?
Yeah, he comes with me to my lectures on Thursday nights, so.
Well, fun. You guys added a lot of energy to the room.
Yeah.
Actually, it was good.
Yeah, it was good synchronicity.
Yeah.
So you're the dean of the engineering school, or?
Assistant dean.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Had a young woman, a coder that I met from she was at one of our deals. A lot of fun.
What was her name?
Lisa White.
Yeah, I just hired Lisa a little while ago.
Terrific. I just, we sat down, got to talking.
Yeah.
I got her engaged as a mentor with some of our young gals now.
Cool. Yeah, I have like 25% women on my staff. And, I work with Lucy Sanders and NC Wed.
Yeah, I think I saw you got an award from Chamber at that event.
Oh yeah. They sent me to talk.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
That was good.
Okay.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, no, I graduated from CU with my master's in 1992. So I'm trying to bridge the gap back with
Yeah, it was a couple of decades before that.
bring the startup community
That's
and
impressive.
CU back together a little bit.
I just love it. The thing that will blow people's minds at CU at some point in the next decade is the number of successful local entrepreneurs and execs and startups that are CU grads. Because CU doesn't track it well, and it's a crazy list. And what's happening is as CU is becoming more proactive, it used to be, hey, will you send me money? Now it's, hey, will you get involved? And what happens is that people send money after they've been involved for a while and they've had a satisfying experience. It motivates them to send money. So you see that starting to come into play. Did you have fun or were you bored?
It was iPad. It was fun.
Oh, you're good. You had gameplay. What game are you playing?
Awesome. Flatirons, kindergarten.
Yeah. Oh, is that right?
Yep. I got it.
Nice? I
Got
the
the information.
Excellent.
Now I know where you are.
All right, we gotta go get his sister.
All right, I got a split.
All right,
And then
Brad,
back down to
thanks
Florida.
again.
Good to see you.
Great stuff.
Bye. Thank you
No,
for
I mean
coming.
it's good. It was just fortuitous. I walked in, I'm like, what is this thing?
going
Brad
on?
Feld's like, I'm like,
Oh,
and it's
awesome.
free and they have food. Awesome.
my mentor.
Awesome.
So Dave Parker told me that you told him I should find out about Spark. I'm running the startup hall where Upgoal's offices are.
Oh, cool.
So Dave Parker forwarded your email, introduced me to Fletcher.
I went out there.
He's my
That's
security
how it
guy, trying to do literally everything I can do and get away with doing as a university employee that he can do as so I say that.
Just wanted to say real quick, you mentioned about CU trying to get that reinventing that intellectual property. I'm actually working on a recent committee to reinvent the intellectual property policy. I'd love to hear from you. Sure. And I actually run a national organization that promotes it. So promotes different intellectual property practices. So if we could get
Happy to get together. What's your name?
Caleb Cohen. Very nice pleasure.
Great, I'm so grateful.
Those are fun.
So fun.
Awesome. Yeah, just send me a note, brad@feld.com. And thank you.
I'm nuts about it. And I was captivated.
Win!
Yay!
Send me a note, happy to get over there. I have a lot of I have a lot of strong opinions, and I've invested relatively little energy in it because it is too tiresome.
No, I completely agree. And that's what we're running into. However, I ended up getting invited to the White House and they're the ones that are pushing this. And so we've gotten a lot of traction.
Awesome.
Now it's just
No,
time to
I'm
jump on top of it.
happy to spend time and give you a break.
Cheers, mate.
Send me a note.
All right, thank you. I'm like Kate. I'm like Kate. I'm like, chief of staff.
Could you send me